The church smelled faintly of lilies and rain. Outside, the Atlanta sky hung heavy and gray, undecided between drizzle and storm. Inside, I stood alone beside the polished cherrywood casket that held my husband. Walter Greene, the man who built a life, a family, and a future that suddenly felt like ashes in my hands. A whole front row of pews sat empty, reserved for the ones who should have been there, our children, Darius and Lenice. But those seats stared back at me like accusations, a cruel reminder that love doesn't always mean loyalty. "Mrs. Greene," the young funeral director murmured, glancing toward the vacant seats. "Would you like us to wait a few more minutes? Maybe they're running late?" I shook my head. No, Walter hated waiting. My voice didn't tremble, though my hands did. The pastor began reading from a worn Bible, speaking kind, empty words about a good man, a faithful soul. But I barely heard them. All I could think about was how Walter would have frowned at the lilies, too formal for him. He'd have wanted simple red roses, the kind he grew in our backyard every spring. When the service ended, I followed the casket out to the cemetery. The cold air bit at my face, but no tears came. I'd already shed them all, during the sleepless nights, the hospital visits, the final breath that left his chest like a whisper. I watched the casket lower into the earth, the thud of dirt echoing like an unfinished sentence. "Rest now, Walter," I whispered. "You deserved better than this." Back home, the house felt too large, too quiet. His slippers were still beside the recliner. The TV remote sat exactly where he'd left it. Every corner of that living room screamed his absence. I poured myself a glass of the bourbon we only opened on special occasions. This wasn't one, but it felt like it should be. For a long time, I sat in silence, staring at the framed photo from our 40th anniversary. Walter's arm around me, both of us smiling beneath the rose bushes he'd tended for decades. They were gone now, just like him. Out of habit or maybe weakness, I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered before I opened Lenice's Instagram. Her name was first on my feed, and then I froze. A photo, posted 3 hours ago. My daughter on a white yacht, champagne glass raised, sunlight gleaming off the waves. The caption read, "Living free and fearless." My heart went still. Free and fearless. While I buried her father, I scrolled again. Darius, my son, had posted too, a sleek selfie in a Miami conference room. His caption, "Closing deals, chasing dreams." Not a word about his father. Not one. My grip tightened around the phone until my knuckles whitened, and then quietly, I said to Walter's photo on the wall, "Tomorrow, I'm calling Attorney Gibbs." Sleep never came that night. I lay awake, the glow of my phone screen still haunting my eyes. Those smiling faces of my children burned into my mind like cruel ghosts. How did we get here, Walter? How did the children we raised with love turn into strangers who could dance while you were being buried? By sunrise, the anger had cooled into something sharper, clarity. I made a pot of coffee I didn't really want and sat at the kitchen table where Walter used to read the morning paper. The silence felt heavier than grief. It felt like truth settling in. I opened Instagram again, half hoping I had imagined it. But there she was, Lenice, my daughter, her perfect smile gleaming under a Caribbean sky. I tapped the photo and felt my chest tighten. The timestamp, 11:43 a.m. The same minute. The pastor said Walter's name for the first time during the service. I swiped through her story, boomerangs, of clinking glasses, laughter, a birthday cake that wasn't hers, and then the comment that made me push back from the table. Someone wrote, "Girl, aren't you supposed to be at your daddy's funeral?" Lenice had replied with a laughing emoji, just one. That tiny yellow face mocked every tear I had shed. I put the phone down before I threw it across the room. My hands trembled. I tried to steady them by thinking of Walter, his calm voice, his patience. But then I thought about his last night alive. How he'd whispered, "Promise me, Mara, don't let them forget who they are." And I had promised. But looking at those photos now, I realized they'd already forgotten. I checked Darius's page next. His latest post was even colder. Him in a navy suit, shaking hands with a man in front of a Success Summit banner. Caption: Big day, big wins, building my legacy. Legacy. Walter's legacy was buried yesterday, while his son was out building his own. I stared at the photo, numb. The same boy who used to climb onto Walter's lap to hear bedtime stories was now selling his soul for applause. I closed my eyes, trying not to break again. But the silence of the house pressed against me. The air felt wrong. Too still. I rose, went to the living room, and looked at Walter's recliner. His reading glasses still rested on the armrest. Maybe I failed them, I whispered. Maybe I taught them to chase everything except what matters. Then I looked at his picture again, his steady, kind eyes staring back at me. And in that moment, I decided they wouldn't get away with this. The next morning, I walks into Attorney Gibbs's office with a decision that will shock my entire family and turn grief into quiet retribution. By morning, my grief had hardened into resolve. I dressed carefully. Black slacks, gray blazer, hair pinned the way Walter used to like it. There was something symbolic about it, like putting on armor for a quiet war. Attorney Gibbs's office sat in an old red brick building downtown. Walter and I had walked through those same doors years ago when life was simpler, when our biggest worry was choosing a retirement plan. The smell of coffee and polished wood greeted me, along with the faint memory of Walter's laughter echoing through these halls. Gibbs rose when I entered. He was older now, gray at the temples, his voice still steady as ever. "Mrs. Greene," he said gently, "I heard about Walter. I'm deeply sorry. He was one of the good ones. He was the best," I replied, my tone flat but firm. He gestured for me to sit. "How can I help you today?" I met his eyes. "I want to change our will." His brows lifted slightly. "Of course. Many people make adjustments after a spouse's passing." "What sort of changes?" "I want to remove both my children, Darius and Lenice, completely." The words sounded colder aloud than they did in my mind, but I didn't take them back. Gibbs slowly removed his glasses, studying me. "Completely?" "Yes, everything. Our home, the cabin, the accounts, the investments. I want it all left to Jaylen." He leaned back. "Your grandson?" I nodded. "The only one who deserves it." Gibbs hesitated. "Mrs. Greene, I've known your family for years. Are you sure you want to make a decision this final? Grief can—" "I buried my husband alone," I interrupted softly, "while my daughter was drinking champagne on a yacht and my son was taking selfies in Miami." That silenced him. Jaylen was the one who mowed our lawn when Walter got too sick. He drove me to the hospital when I couldn't. He called every night to check on his granddad. He's 22, but he's more of a man than both his parents combined. Gibbs nodded slowly. "Understood. I can structure it as a trust, so Jaylen's parents can't touch a penny." "That's exactly what I want," I said. He made a few notes, then looked up. "Do you want him to have immediate access or—" "Not until he's 30, I said. "Except for education or emergencies." "That's sensible," he said, quietly admiring the strength in my voice. When he handed me the pen, my hand didn't tremble. As the ink touched the page, a strange peace settled over me. This wasn't revenge, it was balance. I stood to leave. Gibbs clasped my hand gently. "You know they'll find out eventually." "I'm counting on it," I said, my tone calm as ever. That night, I opens the drawer of old family records and uncovers decades of sacrifices my children had already forgotten. But what I finds inside changes everything. That night, after returning from Attorney Gibbs's office, I didn't bother turning on the TV. The house was too quiet for background noise, and my thoughts were loud enough. The will was changed. It was done. But peace didn't come easily. It rarely does when you've spent a lifetime building a family that slowly forgot how to love you back. I walked to Walter's old desk, the one he kept so meticulously organized. His tools, his pens, his notebooks, each item still in its place like he might come back any second to use them. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the bottom drawer where we stored our important documents. Bills, insurance forms, deeds, and then, tucked neatly toward the back, 2 brown folders, labeled in Walter's neat handwriting. Darius, Business and Education. Lenice, Life and Wedding. My breath caught. I sat down and opened Darius's folder first. Receipts, invoices, wire transfers, each one a reminder of how often Walter and I stepped in to rescue him. Tuition for his MBA at that overpriced university. $75,000 for a business startup that failed in less than a year. Another $12,000 for the down payment on his luxury car. I could still hear Walter's voice saying, "He just needs a push, Mara. He'll find his way." He never did. Then came Lenice's folder, just as thick. Wedding bills that read more like corporate budgets. Designer flowers, a ballroom rental, a $10,000 cake. Renovations for her condo, private school tuition for her son, even the stress recovery trip to Mexico that Walter insisted we help pay for. As I flipped through the pages, a pattern revealed itself, one I had always refused to see. Every request wrapped in charm, every debt smoothed over by, "Thank you, Mama, you're the best." And then silence. Until they needed more. I leaned back in the chair, folder in my lap, eyes burning. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was the quiet way they took without gratitude, expecting us to always be the safety net under their mistakes. For a long moment, I stared at the ceiling. The clock ticked in the hallway, steady, indifferent. Walter used to say, "Love isn't proven by what people say when they're happy. It's what they do when you need them most." I finally understood what he meant. I closed the folders, slipped them back into the drawer, and locked it. Not out of anger, but as a record. A testament to where our hearts had gone wrong. The phone on the counter buzzed, breaking the silence. The name flashing across the screen made me pause. Jaylen. When my grandson shows up the next day, I finds a reflection of the man I lost and the hope I thought was gone. But what Jaylen says over lunch will spark a new turning point. By noon the next day, I'd already set the table for 2. I wasn't expecting company, but somehow I knew he'd come. Jaylen always did. Sure enough, a soft knock echoed through the house. When I opened the door, there he was, Jaylen Greene. My grandson, tall and lean, his face a gentler version of Darius's, his eyes filled with the same quiet kindness Walter once had. "Hey, Grandma," he said with that shy half-smile that always disarmed me. "I brought something." He lifted a canvas tote from his shoulder. Inside were a few worn books, mostly old classics, their pages yellowed. "Found these at the used bookstore. Thought Grandpa would have liked them." My throat tightened. Walter had loved secondhand books, said they carried other people's stories in the margins. "Come in, baby," I managed. "Lunch is ready." We ate in the backyard under the maple tree Walter planted decades ago. The air smelled faintly of earth and distant rain. Jaylen talked about college, about his part-time job at a bookstore, about applying to a graduate program in African American literature. His voice carried quiet enthusiasm, not the sharp edge of ambition that his father and aunt always wore like armor. He spoke about his dreams, his worries, money, tuition, rent. I just listened, the way Walter used to listen to me when I rambled about bills or family drama. When he finished, I said softly, "So how much is this graduate program?" He looked embarrassed. "It's a lot, Grandma. More than I can afford. But it's okay. I'll figure it out. How much?" I repeated. He hesitated, then said the number. It wasn't even 1/10 of what Darius had asked us for that failed business. "Apply," I said simply. He blinked. "What? Apply for the program, Jaylen. I'll take care of the rest." He shook his head immediately. "Grandma, I can't let you do that. You've already done so much," I cut him off gently. "Who do you think your grandfather and I saved for all these years?" "For people who need it and deserve it." Jaylen looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "You really think I deserve it?" I smiled, feeling that same warmth I once saw in Walter's eyes when he looked at our grandson as a boy. "Baby, you've got more heart than most grown folks I know." "Of course you do." After lunch, he insisted on washing the dishes, humming softly to himself. When he left, I stood in the doorway watching his old car rattle down the street. The same street Darius and Lenice had long since forgotten existed, For the first time in weeks, I felt peace instead of emptiness. But peace doesn't last long, not in families like ours. Later that night, my phone rings again, and this time it's Lenice. Her voice sounds sweet, but her words reveal the greed behind the concern. The phone rang just as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the living room in stripes of golden shadow. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. Lenice. For a second, I considered letting it ring. But after everything I'd seen online, maybe it was time to hear what she had to say. With my own ears, I answered. Hello? Mom? Finally, you picked up. Her voice was sweet but too rehearsed. I've been so worried about you. I stared at the window, watching a bird land on the fence. Worried? I said quietly. That's new. Of course. You just lost Dad. I've been thinking about you nonstop. I even lit a candle for him on Sunday. A humorless laugh escaped before I could stop it. You were lighting candles on a yacht, baby. Silence. The kind that says you've been caught. Mom, I can explain. I don't need you to explain, Lenice. I saw the pictures. Her tone sharpened. You've been checking my social media? You posted it to the world, I replied evenly. You wanted everyone to see you were living free and fearless. She sighed dramatically, the way she used to when I told her she couldn't stay out past curfew. Mom, that trip was planned months ago. I couldn't cancel everything just because your father died? I interrupted softly, her breath caught. That's not fair. No. Lenice, I said, my voice low and steady. What's not fair is a man working his whole life to give his children comfort. And in the end, being buried alone, Mom. I was processing things in my own way, she tried again, her voice wobbling between irritation and guilt. I leaned back in Walter's old recliner, staring at the faint outline of his glasses still resting on the table. You didn't process, sweetheart. You escaped. She fell silent for several long seconds, then her tone shifted, subtly, but I caught it. Anyway, I heard from Darius that you've been making some financial decisions lately, helping Jaylen with school and all. There it was. The real reason for the call. I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. That's right. I'm helping him. Mom, she began, feigning concern again. You just lost Dad. Maybe you shouldn't rush into big decisions right now. It's not good for your mental health. I'm thinking clearer than I have in years, I said. Her silence was sharp as glass. Lenice, I added, if you ever want to really talk, to see me face to face, you know where I live. I'm busy, Mom. You know how work is? I do, I said softly. That's why you missed your father's funeral. The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the quiet phone, feeling the strange calm that only truth can bring. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I hears the rumble of a familiar engine outside. My son Darius has arrived unannounced, and he isn't here for condolences. By the time I heard the engine, I already knew who it was. Only one car in the family had that low, throaty hum. A metallic silver luxury sedan Darius had bought last year, the kind that announces itself before it even reaches the driveway. I didn't bother fixing my hair or pretending surprise when he rang the bell. Mom, he greeted, leaning in for a brief hug that smelled faintly of cologne and expensive urgency. You look tired. I gave him a tight smile. Grief does that. He nodded, pretending sympathy, his eyes scanning the room the way he used to assess office spaces, cold, calculating, looking for signs of weakness. Lenice said you've been making changes. Big ones. I've been making choices, I corrected. Ones I should have made years ago. He exhaled through his nose, pacing slowly. Mom, I know you're hurting. We all are. But you shouldn't be making financial decisions while you're emotional. You could regret it later. I folded my arms. You mean I could regret not consulting you? His jaw tightened. That's not what I said. No, I replied. But it's what you meant. He sat on the sofa, Walter's old spot, and for the first time I noticed how strange it looked. My husband had always filled that seat with warmth. Darius filled it with tension. I've worked hard to make you proud, he began, his tone slipping into the practiced cadence he used on clients. My business is growing. I'm trying to build something lasting. For our family name. For the family name, I echoed, almost to myself. You missed your father's funeral to protect the family name? He shifted uncomfortably. Mom, that meeting in Miami was important. You know how this world works. Timing is everything. Your father used to say the same thing about love, I said quietly. He believed you show up when it matters most. You didn't. Please don't start that again, Darius said, rubbing his temple. What's done is done. We just need to move forward. Together. Together, I repeated. That's interesting, since for years it's only been your father and me carrying everyone else. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I stood and walked to the cabinet. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a folder and placed it on the coffee table. His name, written in Walter's neat handwriting, stared up at him. Recognize this? He flipped it open, scanning the pages. I watched his expression shift from confidence to discomfort. Your tuition. Your business loans. That car you're so proud of. All paid from this house. Mom, why are we talking about this? Because your father's gone, I said evenly, and I'm taking inventory, not just of what we have, but what we've given. His face flushed. What are you saying? I changed the will, Darius. He froze. You what? You and Lanice are no longer beneficiaries. Everything goes to Jaylen. The silence that followed was heavy, dangerous. You can't do that, he snapped. I already did. He rose abruptly, grabbing his keys. You'll regret this, Mom, sooner or later. I watched through the window as he stormed down the driveway, phone pressed to his ear. I didn't need to guess who he was calling. As Darius and Lanice join forces against me, I seeks comfort in the one place Walter always turned to for strength, his garden. But what I discovers there gives me a chilling sense of déjà vu. The house felt heavier after Darius left, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I stood at the window, watching his car vanish around the corner. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was warning. When I finally turned away, my eyes fell on the small wooden box sitting by the back door. Inside was Walter's gardening kit, rusted scissors, twine, and a pair of worn gloves that still carried traces of soil. He had always said tending a garden was how you keep your soul clean. I slipped on his gloves and stepped outside. The late afternoon light cast long, fractured shadows across the yard. The rose bushes Walter planted years ago stood there, brittle and tired. The same red roses that bloomed so proudly in our anniversary photo were now bowed and withered, like grief made visible. I knelt down, brushing my fingers over one of the dying blooms. You always said they'd come back, I murmured, even after the hardest winter. I pruned the stems carefully, the way he taught me, cutting away what no longer lived, giving what remained a chance to grow again. The air smelled faintly of earth and bourbon from the half-finished glass I'd brought outside. Every snip of the scissors felt symbolic. For every betrayal, every missed visit, every hollow apology, I cut another dead branch away. By the time the sun dipped low, I was surrounded by fallen petals and silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't emptiness. It was release. I sat back in the rocking chair Walter built with his own hands, watching the sky turn from gold to blue to deep violet. For the first time since the funeral, I whispered his name out loud. Walter, I did it. I finally did it. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. A faint, approving growl from heaven, maybe. I took a long sip of bourbon and let my head rest against the chair. The air cooled, and for a moment I could almost feel him beside me. The warmth, the scent of his aftershave, the weight of his presence. You were right, I said softly. Love doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be respected. A light breeze brushed through the yard, shaking the rose petals that had fallen at my feet. I took that as his answer. Inside, the clock chimed 7. The house, though quiet, no longer felt empty. It felt claimed again. Mine. Just as I rose to go inside, headlights cut through the dusk. The hum of an engine rolled into the driveway, smooth and expensive. For a moment, I thought Darius had returned. But when the door opened, and I saw the flash of bright hair in a designer handbag, my stomach dropped. Lanice. And she wasn't alone. Lanice isn't here to reconcile. She's here with her husband, and what they demand from will test the last shred of my patience and grace. Lanice never knocked. She never had to. Even now, after everything, she pushed the front door open like she still owned a piece of this house. "Mom," she said sharply, setting her handbag on the console table. Behind her stood Malcolm, her husband, tall, polished, and perpetually bored, eyes glued to his phone like always. "We need to talk." I didn't turn around right away. I was still at the sink, washing Walter's old mug, the one that read, "World's Best Granddad." I let the water run longer than I needed to, then set the mug gently on the counter. "Good evening to you, too." "Lanice," I said finally, drying my hands. "And what could be so urgent?" She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelet flashing under the kitchen light. "Darius called me. Said you've lost it. That you cut us out of the will. Tell me that's not true." Malcolm cleared his throat softly but didn't look up. I noticed he still hadn't removed his sunglasses even indoors. Typical. I met her stare. "It's true." Her jaw dropped slightly. "You're kidding." "I'm not." "Mom, you can't just erase your own children like that. That's," she waved her manicured hand, "cruel." "Cruel," I repeated, my voice steady. "Cruel was leaving your father's casket surrounded by empty chairs. Cruel was posting yacht pictures while I stood over the man who paid for that smile on your face." "Mom," she gasped, her tone more defensive than ashamed. "You don't understand." "I was so indisposed?" I interrupted. "That's what your assistant said." "Funny, I didn't know being on a yacht counted as medical leave." Malcolm shifted uncomfortably, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Mrs. Greene," he said in his smooth, detached voice, "I'm sure we can handle this matter calmly. Decisions made under grief. Stop." I raised a hand. "Don't talk to me like I'm one of your business clients. You weren't there either, Malcolm. Not once during Walter's illness. Not one visit. Not one call." His lips tightened. Lanice shot him a glare before turning back to me. "Mom, listen," she said, her voice softening in that way she used when she wanted something. "You're hurting." "I get that. But you can't just give everything to Jaylen. He's a child. He's a man," I said, "and one who understands what family means. Something you and your brother seem to have forgotten." She slammed her purse shut, her voice rising. "You're making a mistake. Dad would never have approved of this." I took a slow breath and met her gaze. "Your father sat in that chair for 6 months waiting for you to visit. He died disappointed." "Don't you dare speak for him." Lanice's face went pale. Her lips quivered, but pride held them shut. She grabbed her handbag and turned for the door. "This isn't over." Malcolm followed silently. The door clicked shut. The house exhaled again, and then the phone rang. The caller ID, Charles and Ruth Ellis, our next-door neighbors. When I answers, an unexpected dinner invitation leads to the first real comfort I felt since Walter's death, and a reminder that not all families are bound by blood. "Evening, Miss Mara?" came Ruth Ellis's soft voice through the receiver. "Charles and I were just talking about you. We thought maybe you'd join us for supper tonight. Nothing fancy, just stew and cornbread." For the first time in weeks, I felt my lips twitch toward something that resembled a smile. Ruth had been our neighbor for 30 years. She and Charles were like the last roots left from the old days, when the world still made sense. "That's kind of you, Ruth," I said. "But I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding, baby," she said firmly. "You've been sitting in that big house alone too long. Walter wouldn't want that." 6 o'clock. "We'll come get you if you don't show." And just like that, the decision was made for me. I changed into one of my softer dresses, navy blue, the one Walter used to call my Sunday calm. As I looked in the mirror, I could almost hear him say, "Go on now. Mara, people who love you are still out there." Ruth's house smelled of baked bread. Time and warmth, the kind of comfort money can't buy. Charles sat in his recliner, glasses perched low, watching a rerun of Good Times. He stood when I entered and wrapped me in a hug that felt like family. "Good to see you, Mara," he said. "We miss Walter something fierce." "I do too," I whispered. Over dinner, we didn't talk much about the funeral. They just asked how I was sleeping, whether Jaylen was visiting, whether I was eating properly. Their concern wasn't nosy. It was genuine. That kind of gentleness felt foreign after weeks of cold calls and fake sympathy. At one point, Ruth reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "You know, baby, sometimes the Lord cuts off what's rotting so the rest can bloom again. Don't you confuse pruning with punishment." Her words sank deep. They reminded me of Walter's garden, of the way I'd cut away the dead branches just yesterday. After dinner, Charles pulled out his old guitar and played softly, a blues tune Walter used to hum while tinkering in the garage. I closed my eyes, letting the sound fill the quiet places in my chest. For a few precious minutes, the world didn't feel so lonely. As I stood to leave, Ruth handed me a small container wrapped in foil. "Cornbread for later," she said, smiling. "And don't you dare tell me you'll return the dish. I'll be mad if you do." When I returned home, the house no longer felt like a tomb. I set the cornbread on the counter, exhaled, and glanced toward the mantel. At Walter's photo. "Looks like I made it through another day," I whispered. Then I noticed something strange. A white envelope slid halfway under the front door. No name on it. No stamp. Just my address written in a familiar shaky hand. Inside that envelope lies Darius's handwritten letter. Part apology, part manipulation. And it will force me to confront whether forgiveness and foolishness can sometimes look too much alike. I stood staring at the envelope for nearly a minute before picking it up. The handwriting was unmistakable. Darius's, the same looping cursive he'd used in grade school when he wrote those Mother's Day notes that used to melt my heart. But this wasn't a note written by a boy with sticky fingers and a crooked smile. This was written by a man who'd looked his mother in the eye and walked out her door. I carried the envelope to the dining table, set it down beside Walter's framed photo, and poured myself a cup of tea before opening it. My hands shook, not from fear but from something heavier. Inside was a single page, neatly folded. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly on the paper. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation. I know I said things I shouldn't have. I was angry and caught off guard. I didn't mean to disrespect you or Dad's memory. I realize now how much pressure you've been under. Maybe we can find a compromise. I'm not asking for much, but cutting us out completely feels wrong. You know I've always wanted to carry on Dad's legacy, and I can't do that without some part of what he built. Let's talk. I'll come by soon. I love you." Darius' eyes set the letter down and stared at the last line. "I love you." Those words should have meant something, but they didn't. They hung there like perfume on cheap flowers, pleasant from afar, but gone too soon to be real. "Compromise," I whispered under my breath. That was his word for control. For years, he'd compromised his way into everything he wanted. Money, approval, forgiveness. Walter used to warn me. "Mara, our boy knows charm better than truth." I hadn't wanted to believe it then, but I saw it now. Still, the letter hurt. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. No sorrow for missing the funeral. No memory of his father's kindness. Just negotiation wrapped in sentiment. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it inside Walter's old Bible, the one he kept on the nightstand. He always said truth and time belonged together. Just as I closed the cover, a soft knock came from the front porch. I frowned, glancing at the clock. Nearly 8. Too late for company. Peering through the window, I saw a familiar figure in a gray hoodie, his head bowed, hands in his pockets. Jaylen. I opened the door before he could knock again. "Evening, baby. Everything all right?" He smiled gently, eyes warm as ever. "Just wanted to check on you, Grandma. Thought you might need help with that old porch light again. And maybe it was just the twilight, but for a second, just a second, I could have sworn Walter was standing right behind him." Over tea and old memories, Jaylen learns the truth about the inheritance. and his humble reaction leaves me shaken in the best possible way. But someone else is already plotting their next move. Jaylen stepped into the house, the faint scent of rain clinging to his hoodie. He shook it off by the door and gave me that polite grin that never failed to soften my mood. "I was just out for a drive," he said. "Thought I'd stop by. You shouldn't be alone so much, Grandma." "Alone is quiet," I replied, smiling faintly. "Quiet can be good." He followed me to the kitchen, where I poured him a cup of tea. He sat where Walter used to, elbows on the table, hands cupping the mug like it was something precious. "How's school?" I asked. "Busy," he chuckled. "But good busy. I'm tutoring a few kids at the community center now, trying to keep up with classes too." His words warmed me. He wasn't chasing status. He was building something real, something his father and aunt never understood. We talked for a while, about books, music, life. The kind of conversation that fills the spaces silence leaves behind. Then, without quite meaning to, I said it. "I changed the will." Jaylen looked up sharply. "The will?" I nodded. "Everything. This house, the savings, your granddad's investments. It's all going to you now." He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Grandma, why?" "Because you've been here," I said simply. "When your granddad got sick, when the house needed fixing, when I could barely stand from crying, you showed up. That's what family means." He set his cup down slowly. "I don't think I can accept that." The words hit me like a small, quiet earthquake. "What do you mean you can't?" "I don't deserve all that, Grandma. Dad and Aunt Lenise, they're your kids. Even if they messed up, they're still family." His voice was calm, but I heard the same gentleness Walter had carried in every argument. Every hard truth. "You're too good-hearted for your own good," I said softly. He smiled a little. "Granddad used to say that too." I laughed, a sound I hadn't made in weeks. He was right. Jaylen looked down at his hands. "You know, I don't want the money, Grandma. What I do want is to make something that lasts. Maybe a community space or a library, something Grandpa would be proud of." A lump rose in my throat. "He'd love that, baby. More than you know." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind outside. Then his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Dad," he muttered. "He's been calling me all day." I felt my stomach tighten. "Don't answer right now," I said. "Enjoy your tea." He hesitated, then nodded and turned the phone face down. But even as he smiled and changed the subject, I could see the tension behind his eyes, because Darius wasn't the kind of man who called without a reason. When Attorney Gibbs calls the next morning, his news confirms my fear. Darius has already begun looking for legal loopholes. But I has a plan of my own, one that begins with a letter. The next morning I was up before the sun. Old habits die hard. Walter used to rise early, make coffee, and read the paper before the world woke up. Now I did it alone, but the routine helped keep the memories soft. I was halfway through my second cup when the phone rang. The caller ID read, "Attorney Gibbs." A chill ran through me before I even answered. "Good morning, Mrs. Greene," he began, his tone professional but hesitant. "I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I thought you should know. Darius contacted my office yesterday." "Of course he did. What did he want?" I asked quietly. "He inquired about your will. Said he believed you'd made changes under emotional distress. He asked whether it was legally binding." My lips pressed into a thin line. "And what did you tell him?" "That everything was perfectly valid," Gibbs said firmly. "But I thought you might want to be prepared." He sounded determined. "Determined," I echoed. That's one word for it. We talked briefly about what steps I could take to protect the new will. Gibbs suggested updating witness documentation and storing a verified copy with his office. I thanked him and hung up. For a long while, I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It wasn't anger I felt this time, it was clarity. The same kind that comes when you realize a storm isn't coming. It's already here. I walked to the den, pulled open the drawer where I kept Walter's old stationery, and began to write. The pen glided across the paper slowly, each word deliberate. "My children, If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope time has softened you enough to listen without pride. I don't write this to punish you. I write it because you never learned what your father tried to teach, that love without respect is just noise. You both took from us as though giving was endless. But love, my loves, is not a faucet. It's a well. And you let ours run dry. Walter would have forgiven you. Maybe I do too, in my own way. But forgiveness doesn't mean reward. It means release. I've let go of anger, of hurt, of hope that you'll ever understand what you lost. That's my piece. I hope one day you'll find yours. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope labeled simply, "To my children." Then I placed it inside Walter's Bible beside Darius's old letter. As I set it down, I felt lighter. Not happy, just still. That was when I heard it, a knock at the door. Firm, deliberate. Through the window, I saw a familiar figure standing on the porch, Darius. And this time, his expression wasn't angry. It was unreadable. Darius returns, claiming he wants peace, but I has learned too well that his calm is only the quiet before another storm. One question will decide whether he's truly changed, or only plotting deeper. Darius stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. "Morning, Mom," he said softly, almost rehearsed. "Can I come in?" I hesitated but stepped aside. "If you're here to argue, don't waste your breath." He offered a tight smile. "Not arguing, talking." I led him to the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air. Walter's old morning ritual still alive in this house, even if everything else felt different. Darius sat down slowly, glancing at the framed photo of his father on the mantel. For a moment, his expression flickered. Guilt, maybe? Or memory? "I've been thinking," he began, eyes fixed on his hands. "About Dad, about everything." I said nothing, just poured him a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. "I know I've made mistakes," he continued. "Missing the funeral. That was wrong. I can't defend it. I thought work was everything, that building success was how I'd honor him. But maybe I got that wrong." His tone sounded sincere, but I'd heard this melody before. Soft words, heavy with guilt, but never change. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied evenly. "But words don't fix what's broken, Darius." He nodded. "I know, that's why I came. Maybe we can find some middle ground. You don't have to cut us out completely. I don't want everything. Just something to keep the family name tied together. Maybe a share of Dad's business portfolio, or the lake cabin." "There it is," I said, setting down my cup. He blinked. "What?" "The real reason you came." He flinched just slightly. "Mom, that's not fair. It's honest," I said calmly. "You didn't come to apologize. You came to negotiate. Again." His voice rose, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm trying to make things right. Why do you always assume the worst of me?" "Because, baby," I said softly, "you've taught me to." The words hung in the air like smoke. He stared at me, chest rising and falling before his shoulders finally slumped. "I miss him, Mom," he whispered. "Dad," I can't stop hearing his voice in my head. That broke something in me. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But grief and regret can sound an awful lot like truth when someone needs forgiveness more than they deserve it. "I miss him too," I said quietly. "Every day." We sat there for a long moment, two people separated by blood and choices. He finally stood, eyes shining faintly. "Maybe we can start over?" I didn't answer. I just walked him to the door. "We'll see, Darius." He nodded, stepping out into the sunlight. For the first time in years, he didn't look angry, just lost. As I closed the door, I whispered, "You say the right words, son. But do you mean them?" The house was quiet again, but my heart wasn't. In the days that follow, Darius begins calling regularly, and Lanice stays silent, but I can't shake the feeling that something beneath this newfound calm is shifting. And not all change means healing. The next few weeks rolled by like slow-moving clouds, calm, but heavy with something unseen. For the first time in years, Darius started calling regularly. Just small conversations at first, asking if I'd eaten, checking on my car, even reminding me about my doctor's appointment. He'd slip bits of business talk into each call, but his tone was softer now. Careful. I didn't fully trust it, but I didn't shut it out either. Grief can hollow you out in strange ways. It makes you reach for warmth even when you know the fire might burn again. Lenise, on the other hand, stayed silent. No calls, no texts. The last thing I'd heard was that she'd been traveling with Malcolm again, chasing some new project that probably had more to do with luxury brands than love. I tried not to think about it. Instead, I poured my energy into small things, fixing the porch railing Jaylen had started on, organizing Walter's tools and tending to the rose garden. Every morning, I'd step outside with my cup of tea and check the soil. Tiny green shoots had begun sprouting where I'd pruned the dying branches. Walter's roses were coming back. The sight made me smile every time. It reminded me that life doesn't always grow where you expect it to. Sometimes beauty blooms right after loss. Jaylen stopped by often, too. He brought books, groceries, and once, a folder full of sketches. "It's for an idea," he said shyly. When I opened it, I saw a layout of a building. Small, inviting, with wide windows and bookshelves drawn neatly along the walls. "A library?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, a community library in honor of Grandpa. I want to build it on the lot near the old cabin. A place for kids to study, for folks to read, learn, maybe even heal a little." The words caught in my throat. "That's beautiful, Jaylen." He smiled, a little embarrassed. "It's just a dream right now, but dreams start somewhere." I ran my fingers over the paper, imagining Walter's proud grin if he could see this. "Your granddad would have loved that idea," I said softly. He believed books could fix almost anything, except leaky pipes. We both laughed, and for a moment the house didn't feel empty at all. When Jaylen left that evening, I stood in the doorway and watched the last light fade over the roses. For the first time since Walter's death, I felt something stirring. Not peace, but purpose. Still, a part of me couldn't shake a quiet unease, because life has a cruel way of testing new hope. And somewhere in the dark, I sensed that test was coming. Jaylen's dream of a community library inspires me, but when he shows me the full plan and the cost it will take to make it real, I must decide how far I am willing to go to turn his dream and Walter's legacy into reality. A week later, Jaylen came by again, this time carrying a stack of blueprints, a tablet, and that same spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in anyone since Walter was alive. He spread the papers across my dining table, smoothing them out with careful hands. "I stayed up all night working on this, Grandma. I think I finally figured it out." The design was beautiful, clean, simple, and full of life. A one-story building with tall windows to let in the light, shelves lining the walls, and a cozy reading corner near the back. On the blueprint's top corner, he'd written in neat block letters, "The Walter Greene Community Library." My breath caught. He smiled shyly. "It's just a concept for now, but if we could buy that old lot near the cabin, it could really happen. A place for people to gather, study, read, a place that remembers him." I ran my hand gently over Walter's name. For a moment, I could almost see him standing there beside Jaylen, arms crossed, proud, smiling that quiet smile of his that always meant "I told you love never dies." "It's perfect," I whispered. "Just perfect." Jaylen's grin widened, but then it faltered. "There's one thing, though." He hesitated, tapping the papers. "The cost." I braced myself. I talked to a few people who know construction and permits. Between buying the land, materials, and getting the community involved, it's going to take a lot. "How much is a lot?" I asked. He hesitated. "Around 100,000. Maybe more if we want it to last." I leaned back slowly, the number echoing in my head. That was a lot for anyone, but not impossible. Walter had worked his whole life for security. I'd guarded it since he passed. Maybe it was time to use it for something that mattered again. "Don't worry about the money," I said finally. "If this is what you want to build, we'll find a way." His eyes widened. Grandma, I can't let you— You're not letting me, I interrupted gently. We're doing this together. For your granddad. For this family. Jaylen's throat tightened and he nodded. Then I'll make you proud. Both of you. After he left, I sat staring at the blueprints spread across the table. The lines and sketches blurred behind tears I didn't expect. It wasn't sadness this time. It was hope. Fragile, but fierce. I folded the plans carefully and placed them beside Walter's photo. Looks like you're still building things, old man, I murmured. But that night, as I closed the curtains, my phone buzzed. A new message from Darius. Heard about your little project. We need to talk. Word about Jaylen's library spreads faster than I expect. And soon Darius and Lenice both show up, suddenly eager to help. But I knows when family starts showing up after silence. There's always a price. It started with a knock, gentle, polite, but too soon after Darius's message to be coincidence. When I opened the door, I wasn't surprised to see him standing there. What did surprise me was the person beside him, Lenice. She looked different, hair pulled back, sunglasses hiding most of her face, a hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mom, she said softly. We thought we'd stop by. We? I echoed, glancing between them. This must be a family reunion then, Darius forced a chuckle. We just wanted to talk. Can we come in? I stepped aside, watching as they entered the house like guests, not children. Lenice's gaze lingered on Walter's photo above the fireplace before she finally spoke. I heard about the library, she began carefully. Jaylen told me it's beautiful, really. Dad would have loved it. I raised an eyebrow. That's kind of you to say, Darius nodded quickly. Yeah, it's a great idea. That's actually why we wanted to come. We thought maybe we could help. You know, support the project, make it something the whole family's involved in. His tone was smooth, but I'd known that voice since the day he learned to talk. Every syllable dripped with performance. And by support, I asked, You mean— Lenice jumped in before he could answer. We could help with fundraising, publicity. I've got friends who'd love to sponsor something like this. It could bring the Greene name into the spotlight again. There it was, the Greene name. Not Walter's memory. Not community. Not purpose. Legacy, but only the kind they could brand. I appreciate the offer, I said slowly, but Jaylen's handling it just fine. This is his vision. Lenice's smile faltered. Of course. It's just that it's a big project, Mom. You shouldn't be dealing with that stress alone. Maybe if we all work together— Lenice, I cut in, the last time we worked together, your father and I ended up paying off your honeymoon. Darius shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. We just want to make things right. Maybe this project can bring us all closer again. I studied him for a moment. His voice trembled slightly. Was that guilt or strategy? I couldn't tell anymore. Sometimes, I said quietly, you have to let things grow without pulling at them. Otherwise, they never take root. Lenice looked confused. Darius looked annoyed. Before they could reply, Jaylen's car pulled up outside. His laughter carried through the open window as he approached the house, still holding the rolled-up blueprints. I saw the way my children stiffened. I saw the calculation flicker behind their smiles. They didn't come here for peace. They came because they smelled money. Later that night, Lenice returns alone, with secrets, tears, and a confession that shocks me. But behind my daughter's pain lies a truth that changes everything. It was close to midnight when the knock came again, softer this time, hesitant. I opened the door, expecting the wind. Maybe a late delivery, but there she was, Lenice, alone. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes swollen, and her voice cracked when she said, Can I come in, Mama? I stepped aside wordlessly. She walked in slow, clutching her purse like a lifeline. The air between us felt fragile, like the thin ice over a winter pond. One wrong move, and everything could shatter. I poured her a glass of water, and we sat at the kitchen table where so many arguments and memories had already been born. She didn't touch the glass. Malcolm left, she whispered. I looked up. What do you mean? He's gone. Said he needed space, but we both know what that means. I saw the messages. Her voice broke and a single tear slid down her cheek. He's been seeing someone else for months. Someone younger. She laughed bitterly. Guess I finally got what I thought I wanted, huh? Freedom. Fancy things. No roots, just emptiness. I stayed silent, letting her talk. Sometimes silence is the only medicine for a truth too raw to treat. I thought money could make everything better, she continued. I thought success would fill the space where love used to live. But it doesn't, it just echoes. Her words hit me harder than she knew. For years, I'd carried resentment like a shield, protecting myself from the ache of their absence. But now, sitting across from my daughter, all I saw was a woman lost in the same grief I'd been drowning in. Without thinking, I reached across the table and took her hand. She didn't pull away. "Lenise," I said softly, "your daddy used to say love is like a garden. You can't grow anything worth keeping if you don't get your hands dirty." She sniffled, trying to laugh through her tears. "He always had a saying for everything." "Yes," I smiled faintly. "And somehow they always end up true." For a long while, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly, steady as a heartbeat. Then Lenise whispered, "I'm sorry, Mama, for everything. The funeral? The pictures, all of it. I was ashamed. I didn't know how to face you or Dad." Her voice cracked again, and I saw the child she used to be, the one who used to climb into my bed after bad dreams. "I know, baby," I said quietly. "I know." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Can I come by tomorrow? I want to see Jaylen's plans. Maybe help if he'll let me." I smiled through tears I didn't even realize were falling. I think he'd like that. When she finally left, the night felt softer, lighter. For the first time in months, the house didn't echo with loss. It hummed with the faint sound of healing. But as I locked the door, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Darius. "We need to talk. Now." As the family gathers at the nearly finished library site, Darius's arrival brings a storm of truth, pride, and redemption, and forces me to decide whether grace can truly coexist with accountability. The following Saturday, the morning air carried the smell of sawdust and new beginnings. The old cabin lot, once forgotten and overgrown, was now alive with purpose. A few volunteers were helping Jaylen clear brush, pour concrete, and set the first posts for what would soon become the Walter Greene Community Library. Children laughed in the distance, the kind of sound Walter used to say could bless even the heaviest heart. I stood near the edge of the site, watching Jaylen measure the foundation lines with careful precision. He looked so much like his grandfather in that moment, steady, thoughtful, kind. "Grandma, could you hand me the level?" he called. I passed it to him, smiling. "Your granddad would have been proud of you." "I hope so," he said, his eyes shining. "This place? It's for him." Before I could reply, the crunch of tires on gravel made me turn. A black car pulled up. My heart skipped a beat when Darius stepped out. He wasn't dressed for work this time. No suit, no polished mask. Just jeans, a plain shirt, and a face that looked older than I remembered. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. Jaylen straightened, his expression wary. "Dad," Darius nodded to him, then glanced around at the work in progress. "Looks good out here." I crossed my arms, waiting for whatever speech he'd prepared. But instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I sold the car," he said simply. "The Mercedes. Got a decent price for it. I wanted to donate this, to help with the library." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Jaylen looked stunned. "You what?" Darius shrugged. "Figured Dad didn't raise me to keep chasing stuff that doesn't matter. I just wish it hadn't taken me this long to figure that out." The air went still. A quiet peace settled between us, a fragile bridge, but a bridge nonetheless. Lenise arrived a few minutes later, carrying boxes of donated books she'd collected from friends and coworkers. Her hair was tied back, her face bare of makeup, her eyes soft with humility. When she saw her brother, she froze. But Darius only gave her a small nod, the kind that said we're starting over. For the rest of the day, we worked side by side. No shouting, no pride. Just purpose. By evening, the foundation was done. As the sun dipped low, Jaylen hammered a small wooden plaque into the ground, future site of the Mara Greene Community Library. We all stood in silence, watching the light fall over the sign. I felt Walter everywhere, in the wind, in the laughter, in the gentle warmth of a family trying, at last, to grow again. I looked at my children, no longer strangers, just souls learning to begin again, but even peace carries a whisper of the past. Tomorrow would mark 1 year since Walter's passing, and I had one more thing left to do. A soft drizzle fell that morning. Not enough to ruin the day, just enough to make everything glisten. The grass at the cemetery shimmered with dew, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and spring beginnings. It had been exactly 1 year since Walter's passing. I stood by his headstone, a single red rose in my hand, one from the garden he'd planted and I'd fought so hard to keep alive. The petals were perfect, deep crimson, alive with the same quiet dignity he'd carried all his life. Behind me, I heard footsteps. "Morning, Mom." I turned to see Darius and Lenice walking side by side. No designer clothes this time, no rehearsed expressions. Just two people finally stripped of pride, ready to be seen as they were. Jaylen followed close behind, carrying a small wooden box. "Grandma, I brought something for Grandpa," he said gently. He opened it to reveal a tiny engraved key, the first key to the nearly finished Mara Greene Community Library. On the metal was etched a single word: legacy. He knelt and placed it at the base of the headstone. "It's done, Grandpa," he whispered. "You're part of it forever." My throat tightened, and I pressed the rose against the stone. "He'd be proud of you," I said softly. "Of all of us." We stood there for a long while, the four of us, letting the quiet say everything words couldn't. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel anger or disappointment. Only peace, the kind that comes when something broken finally begins to heal. Lenice wiped her eyes. "I went by the library site yesterday," she said. "The kids were already asking when it'll open." "That's the thing about good things," I replied. "They grow faster than you expect." Darius stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "Mom, I don't know how to make up for what we did, for what we didn't do, but I want to spend whatever time I have left trying." I met his eyes, and for the first time, I saw not the man who disappointed me, but the boy who once held Walter's hand walking into church. "You already started," I said softly. "You showed up." The drizzle faded. A soft wind brushed through the trees, and I could almost hear Walter's voice again, steady, low, full of that quiet faith he carried to his last breath. "Let them find their way, Mara. That's love's real work. Not holding on, but letting go when the time comes." I closed my eyes, smiling through the tears. "I let go, Walter," I whispered. And somehow, it brought them back. We left together, not as fractured pieces of what used to be, but as something new. The rose stayed behind, bright against the stone, and for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't look back.